Ignite your curiosity with Austin Next. We're watching Austin transform from a thriving ecosystem into a global superstar. With our host, Jason Scharf, we aspire to better comprehend the true nature of innovation. Together, we will uncover what makes a successful ecosystem and navigate the technologies shaping our future. Now let's dive into what's next.
How do I begin to describe a conversation that covers the future of warfare, probabilistic thinking, the media's portrayal of innovation, inspiring the next generation, the discovery of truth with a capital T, and of course, you can't forget AI. Just a few of the rabbit holes that this week's guest, Charlie Burgoyne, and I traveled down. Charlie is the founder and CEO of Andromeda and Valkyrie, as well as the AI advisor to the United States Central Command, where he brings his expertise to the forefront of national decision-making. Previously, he spent 15 plus years in data science and AI, including roles at Frog Design, Rosetta Stone, and as the founder of various successful companies. Strap in and enjoy the ride. Charlie, welcome to the Austin Next podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jason. I've been looking forward to this.
So 10 years ago, the defense sector and the tech sector, you had protests, you had all sorts of controversy. Today, you have entire funds dedicated to defense and tech. You have major unicorns. What in your mind has changed?
It's an interesting question. I think the relationship of your average citizen and the military has evolved pretty dramatically. In the 70s, some of the most counter-military sentiments were pretty rampant across the United States. Now, groups like Gallup are showing that the most trusted institution in the United States today by your average citizen is the military. So I think that the relationship overall has evolved pretty dramatically to be one of more of a positive and more of an understanding dynamic. It also doesn't touch people personally the way it did during Vietnam. Less than 1% of Americans serve in whatever capacity. And so it really makes it quite an intangible, lets people think about it a little bit more esoterically. I also think that the campaigns in Afghanistan, the campaign in Afghanistan certainly started off with one of the most virtuous challenges that we ever faced. 9/11 was unequivocally terrible, and there was a lot of support for the war in Afghanistan. Now, the eventual, how long we stayed there and the eventual pullout, there's a lot of opinions about that I'll let pundits dive into. But I think that our appreciation for the troops kind of reached a real resurgence, especially after 2001.
What do you think about, though, at what point that the military, you would say, was at the cutting edge of technology, and then at some point that flipped where it seemed and you would know better than I, it seemed to be on the back foot. The most cutting edge technology wasn't in the military, or at least it didn't seem to be. And now there's been a bit of a step up to say, we need to change that. We need to get it back to being at the forefront. First, is my supposition correct in that? And is that part of what's changed the zeitgeist, is that we feel like that the defense sector has fallen behind?
So I think that this has actually been a phenomenon forever. But it's just coming to light because of the nuances of the modern battle space that we're engaging in now. Every time we enter a new age, people focus on the industrial transformations of that age, the Bronze Age, the Atomic Age, the Information Age. Everybody thinks about the industrial applications, but there's always a commensurate evolution in warfare that goes along with that change in age. So during the Atomic Age, right, a renewed energy and rigor around scientific inculcation into defense technology was created. I mean, Los Alamos, right, was only a thing because of wartime pursuits. Now, the guys at Berkeley, of course, were working on a lot of this material and were pulled into that. But I think that this has always been a phenomenon. The Information Age is different because those who have the keys to the most advanced capabilities in the information space are also some of our loudest and most visible entrepreneurs. So Zuckerberg and Musk and individuals who are running social media infrastructures and empires, these are actually this is actually the battle space that's the most critical space for the 21st century. And just so happens that we have a lot of exposure to them. But make no mistake about it, Henry Ford was just as important for World War II as those who are running information tools are for 2024.
So is it better then, to your point, us to look back at the, call it 1880s to 1950s relationship with the industrial titans and commercial age to the government and defense technology, rather than looking at, the 1940s through, I know I'm overlapping time periods, to 1980s?
Oh yeah, I think unequivocally you could say that McDonald family, the Boeing family, the Hughes family, the Ford family, these were as integral to the success in World War II as the armed forces. Now maybe that's a little bit hyperbolic, but it's certainly the case that we needed Sherman tanks en masse and way more of them because they were technically inferior to the Panzers. We needed way more of them, and we needed an industrial complex that could support that. So. I think that it's always been mission critical to have a very tight relationship with industry, and the evolution that we have now is that this is just an industry that everybody has a sharp focus on. So it's bringing more light to it.
Well, and it's an interesting when thinking about like the zeitgeist and the narrative. I mean, one of the biggest movies of the last 18 months was Oppenheimer.
Yeah,
and I wonder, one is it the fact that Oppenheimer, can we take nuclear and put in AI, and that's something that we're all thinking about? And by the way, I think it was an amazing movie, and one, just being just a general Chris Nolan fan, and two, it was just well written and well acted. But also, given just the relationship and defense being in all of our mindsets, I mean, is that could you think of that being one of the reasons that it did so well and kind of resonated with everybody?
Oh, I think Oppenheimer was. I agree with you. I'm a huge fan of Nolan's films, and Oppenheimer. Obviously, it's like, it's like crack for a physicist. All of our heroes are popping up in these tiny little cameos, from Fermi to Dirac to obviously I think Schrodinger even has a role in it. Anyway, but everybody's in it, right? So I think that one of the reasons that movie garnered so much attention is because as Americans are hungry for stories about how pushing the boundaries of innovation is tied with implications for humanity. I think that's actually just one of the most human stories ever. And I think there's a really good analog that can be drawn between, this very visible and taxing strife that you see on Cillian Murphy's face, and the face that you would see on the face of any of the entrepreneurs who are in the deep mind space right now. I think if they made a movie about Sam Altman in 40 years, there are similar struggles that he would be facing. Or God forbid they make a movie about what we do in Valkyrie, just from a humility standpoint. Like the struggles on my face would also very much reflect the gravity of what pushing the boundaries of this science is really at our what we're really doing at our core.
I think the narrative parts are so important. I mean, in the last week, it's just been interesting from a balance. So I don't even know why we ended up doing this, but I watched my 10-year-old son. We watched The Martian again, and I had forgotten how uplifting and inventive and just kind of facing those same challenges you were talking about that movie was. And then we're recording this the morning of the fourth Starship launch, and how I made sure my kids watched that, and I can imagine the face of everybody in there as it was kind of going through. And then there was also a headline that was like, oh well, Starship the launch happened and it didn't explode, and my head nearly exploded when I read that AP headline. So we have this kind of tension of the narratives as well, of trying to be inventive, be innovative at the same time as trying to create a more optimistic future.
I had the great honor of speaking at Cape Canaveral over the weekend, the Astronaut Hall of Fame event that NASA put together. I'm very fortunate. They asked me to come and speak at this every year. It's been great. But I spoke a little bit about this zeitgeist that you're referring to. this palpable affinity that we have for the way in which science and innovation can really inspire a generation. And the analogy that I brought up was, well, when I was a kid, when I was a 5-year-old kid, when I went back to school, I buy a NASA lunchbox, right? Every year I got excited about lunchbox. I bought a NASA lunchbox, as often as not. And that's really funny when you think about it. Like I bought a lunchbox that was branded after an American, giant bureaucratic organization, so why? Like, why is that? And I think
It gives you the
fundamentally,
dreams of what you thought it was, rather than the ins and outs of the bureaucratic nature.
totally, and what does it represent? Like, sure, there's like all this exploration, and sure that there's, hey, we walked on the moon, that's amazing. But I think actually, like, more critically, what NASA represents is this tireless pursuit of truth and the protection of civilization through that truth, right? That truth that they discovered, has implications for MRI machines, has implications for everything from Velcro to Tang. Right. NASA actually contributed to that, and arguably, it destroyed the most violent and terrifying regime on the face of the planet, which was the Soviet Union. Like, unequivocally, nobody's died from any cause in the history of the planet more than those at the hands of the Soviets. And so, when you look at the NASA, you look at a NASA lunchbox, you think, okay, cool. Like, they just want to go and explore. Like, I think it's deeper than that. I think we want to believe in the institution of truth, and that truth, pursuing that scientifically, can not only create, can give us free will, right, by giving us an understanding of our ecosystem, but it can actually give us dominion over our ecosystem, because those truths afford us the flexibility to really own our own domain. And what I always tell our team at Valkyrie is that, I was a kid buying a NASA lunchbox because of the shuttle and, Apollo missions that happened decades before I was born. I wonder if, like, our kids or our kids' kids are going to buy are going to buy Valkyrie lunchboxes because of what we're able to accomplish in this laboratory.
So it's funny because you think about what the kids are exposed to. I'll say so. My 10-year-old has, they do this kind of thing called like the wax museum, where they all do their different famous people, and they do like a 2-minute speech. And he wanted to do Sam Altman because he thinks AI is so interesting, and constantly he jokes about wanting to break AI and find its limits. And for me, you were doing NASA lunchboxes, and I became obsessed with DNA. So all of us kind of have those early stage things that we find and want to push and it's funny, the search for truth, I think about it as pushing the frontier. And I think we're at that moment again to kind of keep pushing it. And I think whatever we can say, the great stagnation happened, right? And in the 1971 and whatever, the famous line, whatever happened in 1971. But I think it's coming back, right? And I think that a lot of it's exciting times for us, and I think it's exciting times for our children, and all the things that are possible going forward. I want to go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think you hit it right on the head with Oppenheimer. I mean, here's a 3-hour documentary with really one action scene the whole time, and it was pit against some really big movies. I mean, it clobbered Barbie, and you would have thought a cynic 3 years ago would have said, there is no way that a 3-hour movie produced, with a bunch of actors, only a couple of which are well known, is going to outperform one of the most pulp-oriented films that I can remember. Like, you wouldn't have believed that, right? And I think you're spot on that, like, this pendulum of inspiration is swinging back into a place where people really they crave that at their core. And it wasn't that long ago. I mean, it wasn't that long ago at all that Americans had more, there were more season pass holders at the opera than Major League Baseball. That's two generations ago. My grandfather would have remembered that particular era. And so I always, there are a lot of people who are downtrodden and worried about where the future of our civilization is going. And I'm not. I'm bullish, because as a physicist, I have to believe in waves. And there's a duality right now between the outgoing epic of loss, loneliness, and I think purposelessness that's waning, and then an increasing waxing of energy, focus, and inspiration.
No, it just get the energy, but being around the builders, and I think that's That's why I think you and we all do the things that we do. I want to kind of pivot a little bit back into kind of defense and warfare and kind of the things that Valkyrie and Andromeda are doing. So when we think about the advancements in AI and drones and all these different technologies and what we're seeing in Ukraine and in Israel, how do you see warfare evolving over the next decade? I mean, do we see it becoming more distant and video game like? I hate to kind of use that term, but I think it's kind of the one way to think about it. Or is it becoming much more of very individual small team where they're almost augmented by this technology? It's one person with 10 drones and the Boston Dynamic robots around them. I mean, how do you see the future of warfare?
Oh boy, this could be a many part conversation. But to be
You've got
succinct,
one sentence.
yeah, one sentence, yeah. Full disclosure, I serve as an advisor to U.S. Central Command or U.S. CENTCOM. So
So I want
anything I
all
say,
top secret stuff for this podcast.
everything I say here is not on. It's my own opinion. Is not actually the opinion of the United States military. Um, what do we go to war for? Fundamentally, we go to war because we have an inconsistency, an incongruity between resources we possess and our own ideology. Actually, every war, if you go back throughout the history of our species, fundamentally breaks down to people who believe one thing and have a set of resources, and then identifying where those ideologies are at odds, and then allocating resources to correct that. Truly, since the beginning of time, what we've identified in the last 50 years or so is that kinetic engagement, traditional warfare, bullets and bombs, really doesn't do a whole lot to change ideologies. In fact, the proliferation of small arms weaponry, rifle with 308 or a 5.56 round, is actually super effective against even the largest superpowers. We're seeing this right now in real time in Ukraine, where Ukrainians that are armed with little more than javelins, drones, small arms fire, and then Palantir are able to really effectively push back Putin, who has pretty defensively the best artillery in the entire planet. Okay, so why is that the case? And candidly, we have a similar story for Afghanistan. It's pretty incredible what cases of AK-47s in the hands of a military-aged male in his home territory where he grew up. It's pretty incredible what he's able to do, right? And so this whole model of us, hey, we're going to go send in troops, we're going to go own this territory, we're going to go change its dynamics, we're going to go reconstitute, ensure that the existing regime capitulates, reconstitute a new one. I think that's actually pretty much toast because it's just not effective. It doesn't work anymore. And I would argue the best manifestation of that initially was the Soviet campaign in Afghanistan in the 80s. I think that was the first time we saw this and we're like, this whole dynamic is different. I'm not saying that bombs and bullets aren't important, but I think what's the most important thing is actually bullets.
But why do you think it changed? Like, obviously, in Germany and Japan, we were able to stop those regimes, build them up, and they became the allies that they are today. So clearly, something worked during that time, and they weren't. And I think, looking back, those were two vastly different countries. So it wasn't like that you say like, oh, it was, two countries that were very similar. You correct me if I'm wrong in that assumption. So what changed in the intervening period?
So Japan's surrender was very different than Germany's. Right. And that, in fact, Japan's ideology, the ideology of each of their troops, borderline on a psychosis. I mean, it was incredible. We were like in the 70s or 80s and still discovering Japanese soldiers who had not received word that the war was over, who were defending small islands, right?
Yeah, I remember hearing about this.
Unbelievable, right? So it really took the detonation of 2 atomic weapons. I'm not getting into the ethics of that particular subject, sure, but it really took that to create a ceasefire. Germany was very different. Germany had it was actually basically economic destitution and the incredible ability for the American supply chain to be able to be effectuated in Western Europe that led to their capitulation. So Germans had gone through terrible economic times after World War One, all this punitive structures. They had been able to create some wealth in the early days of Hitler's regime, but also it wasn't really well democratized, and there were a lot of people who had issues with the way in which the Nazis were operating for obvious reasons. So I think by the time we had actually entered into Berlin, the average German was like, thank God this is happening. We needed to, like, we've been eating rats for the last 2.5 years. We haven't really been on board with Hitler, but we were starving. Like, it's time for us to, re-enter Western civilization. So I think that the difference is that there aren't really a lot of cases that I can think of for Western military campaigns where we are liberating a people who fundamentally want to become part of the West. Certainly wasn't the case with the Taliban. Certainly hasn't been the case with all the different factions in Iraq. Syria, I'm not even going to get into all the reasons why Syrians are not interested in becoming part of Western ideological frameworks. So I think that, like, fundamentally, we focus so much on shock and awe because we thought that that's the most effective way in which to convert different folks to our side, but it's really the hearts and minds. And I think that's actually where the information age has migrated everyone. We're out of bombs and bullets having an impact, but now bulletins are what have the impact. Mm-hmm. In other words, the information age has introduced information warfare, or has highlighted information warfare as the most important vehicle for being able to mitigate geopolitical threats. In other words, we need to ideologically show the merits of the West and American values, as opposed to trying to bomb them into existence, because it just doesn't work anymore. And secondarily, if you have an ideologically driven individual who grew up in the territory that they are protecting with a high velocity round, 308 or 5.56, whatever round of ammunition, or an AK round, they're really, really effective against us. They're really, really effective against any incoming party. And so we have to actually evolve our thinking, because kinetic warfare is just fundamentally different than it's been for the last 20,000 years, 10,000 years.
Mm-hmm. So I think this is probably a great segue then into, Valkyrie's been around for 8 years, but obviously now is the moment that you are launching Andromeda. How does that fit into everything you just said? Why is now the moment? And can you explain a little bit what Andromeda is and what you're doing?
Yeah, we're at a really difficult crossroads right now for our civilization. The pervasive nature of information in all of its forms, whether it's pure or misinformation or disinformation, contorted information in the form of propaganda, these have proven to be pretty existential threats to us across a variety of different domains. And so at Valkyrie, we're a collection of scientists who build some of the most incredible solutions on the planet, in all humility. Well, not much in humility in that sense, but we build some incredible things. And we realized that there was a potential to create a solution to this problem, to be able to articulate and understand context, and to understand how that context is connected to context in other domains. So Andromeda, our first product company to spin out of the Valkyrie laboratory, is a tool that's able to synthesize natural language, and really language across a variety of different spectrums, but natural language predominantly, synthesize that into one engine, understand how those materials are interconnected to each other contextually to inform a larger knowledge graph. And then we use that information to be able to provide actions, workflows to a variety of different groups. Now, we have a pretty robust government operation. We've been doing this for Uncle Sam for a better part of 4 years now. But now we have commercial derivative applications that are really exciting. So a good way to summarize what we've done is, while Sam and the OpenAI team and the Mistral team, all the other generative AI teams are focused on helping people write at scale with generative models, we're helping people read at scale. In other words, we're helping people look at giant corpora of documents and synthesizing very easily and very quickly all of the embedded context within those documents. And so that's how.
Does that mean that you have to have it trained on? It's kind of what's getting back to our discussion about truth, on what your determined of truth is, and then of course in when we're thinking about defense and the battle, there's intelligence holes, right? I don't know X or Y. So how do you think about those elements?
Yeah, I think that we as a civilization need to reclaim the word truth, and put it back into the context of simply the truth with a capital T. I think, I
Agree.
think we've conflated terms like nuance and truth now for a while, and I think it's actually really dangerous, right? I think when people talk about living their own truth, really what they're talking about are the nuances of their own experience juxtaposed against the nuances of another person's experience. That's totally fine. Claiming you're living your own truth when there are things that are counter truth as part of that, I think are actually really dangerous. So what Andromeda sets out to do is establish, not even establish, uncover empirically substantiated truths devoid of the nuance, originally, and then to super inject how context that traverses information through nuance can be explicitly laid out so that people understand where those nuances, where those biases, where their quote unquote own truths exist.
Mm-hmm.
And this is really important because if you're trying to do something like understand how violent jihadism has expanded throughout the Middle East, or neo-Marxism is expanding through Southeast Asia, or populism is expanding through Latin America, you need to be able to understand how nuance and context are integral parts of natural language that's expressed across mass media. And so we built the first tool that's able to synthesize all of that and provide back policymakers, decision leaders, even our warfighters, the tools they need to be able to augment their workflows with this capability.
Do you deal in, or I mean, if I think about confidence intervals and like the way that you put it in, it's like, okay, we have, yes, we know there is a ground truth, but we don't have access to it in this particular case. Like we know that the information that we're giving you, we're 95% confident in it, or we're 50%, and being able to provide that nuance and context of this particular item just because we haven't gotten to the core truth yet.
Absolutely. And in fact, I think that's probably one of Andromeda's greatest strengths is that when we're operating in high accountability environments, spaces where people have to make big decisions that have real resource implications, life or death situations, billion-dollar decisions, risk decisions that have implications on a whole civilization, the problem is you can't operate in a binary. You really can't. You have no choice but to make a single decision based off of lots of nuanced, contextually based perspectives. And so what Andromeda does is it gives you confidence intervals, really scores on how confident we are that a particular perspective is corroborated by the rest of the components of the knowledge graph. And so that's really liberating for decision makers because they need to evolve out of a binary operating model. It's been tying our hands so aggressively for the last 30 years that those who are responsible for policy, for operations, cannot act without 100% certitude. And that's 100% certitude is debilitating. It means that we're performing inaction much more than action. And that's putting us at an asymmetric disadvantage against our peers and near peers.
Now, I'm going to ask almost the opposite question here. So you give somebody the 95% confident intervals, but that's not 100% certainty. And we don't, let's be honest, people aren't necessarily thinking and trained in the way that we would like them to be thinking in actual probabilities. And so the fact that you have a 95% confidence interval, 5% of the time you're going to be wrong. And so that 5%, someone's going to come back to you and say, you said 95 that X was going to happen and Y happened. This thing's terrible now. I was like, well, no, I didn't say, I wasn't predicting the future, right? I wasn't saying this. So how are you thinking about, how would we need to, one, as you think about Andromeda and training the people that are using it and that, and then just broadly speaking, how should we be thinking about as these types of tools are more in everybody's hands and better able to, I think, using nuance and understanding that things are nuanced in confidence intervals. And I think it's great to start adding those into all of these types of tools. But how should we be thinking about getting that level of training education out there?
This is actually one of the most challenging components facing the United States government right now. There are certain roles, including, so there's a role called an ORSA within the military. And these are individuals that are kind of like data scientists, really, really smart individuals, women and men who use analytics and different approaches mathematically, statistically, to try and solve problems for the military. These folks need to be elevated. Their capabilities need to be expanded upon, and they need to be able to be positioned so that a more nuanced, statistically informed perspective and course of action, or COA, can be pushed forward, right? They need to have a stronger voice so that the calculus against whether or not these probabilities are tenable can be performed by an individual who has those credentials. That's super, super critical. Like, for example, if you're a general today, as 2-star, who's responsible for approving an operation. Say you're in Ukraine, right? Well, we're not operating in Ukraine, obviously. So let's say you're in a Ukrainian general. This would be even easier. I'll project a different nation states defense department. Let's say you're in a Ukrainian general. You're facing 1,200 to 1,400 Russian attacks from a propaganda, misinformation, disinformation standpoint a day. We call that information warfare or psychological operations. 1,200 to 1,400. That's a real figure. And you go to your team and you say, I want to go counter this misinformation by what do we do in the Donbass? Like, how do we go tell these people that that we're not Nazis, that we are trying to protect them from freedom? Give me a strategy. And your team comes back and they say, okay, we have a strategy to go counter this. We're going to go show Putin's tie to a wheat trader. That he's just trying to get wheat so he can, further enrich himself, whatever it is. If the general says, great, what is your confidence that this will work? Is it 100%? If it's not 100%, I'm not interested. I'm going to pass on that. You're never going to perform an operation ever.
Right.
Ever. Right. So we need to be able to have that general be able to look to his team and say, okay, Orsa, okay, statistician, or even somebody who's just had a seminar or a course or a semester of this material. What's the percentage? And they're going to say 95% is going to work. Like, great, I'll own the 5%. This is my ball to call. If the 5%'s off, I'm owning that responsibility. Let's go. Let's go take that hill. That's the shift that we need to be able to see across our forces for a variety of reasons. One, it's scientific. It's the right way to approach these problems. But two, that is how our peers and near peers operate. They do operate against probabilities very, very comfortably. And that puts us at a wild disadvantage because we're uncomfortable to do so.
Do you see the shift happening with the proliferation of these types of tools and the elimination of specialized roles? So instead of being, it's the Orsa, I think you called it, or the statistician who I look to, instead, everybody's armed with these tools and I'm used to using them. So like everybody's using Excel, everybody's using Andromeda, whatever, like these kinds of things. So we all live in them every day rather than I'm going to go do this type of report. I got to go look to so-and-so and I have to then trust, Jane Smith or John Doe or whoever.
Yeah, that's one of the other capabilities that we developed specifically for Andromeda. I swear this wasn't staged to anybody listening. I mean, being able to provide an attributable chain of custody for these decisions is an integral feature for the tool. So if you've put together a course of action, it's like, hey, we're going to go counter Russian influence by doing X. All of the work to support X is part of that package. It's part of that same common operating picture. So that your general can say, okay, well, I don't know if I want to go do this. And she's got a lot of heartburn about whether or not we're going to go push this forward. She can go in and look at the primary source material that supported that decision, that code that you generated, and be able to look for herself at that primary source material. And then that accelerates the approval and it gives confidence across the command.
And the reason I think like this is in my own use of like ChatGPT and these kinds of things is like, I can't program. I've never programmed my entire life. And I remember hearing all these things about like, in 5 years, all programmers are gone. I'm like, okay, that's a bit hyperbolic. And I think they're going crazy. And then I remember one time I was doing something for the podcast website and it was HTML code and it wasn't working the way I wanted it to. And like, I keep hearing about ChatGPT being able to do this stuff, and then threw it into ChatGPT and it did everything for me. And I was like, oh, well, maybe classic coders are going away. So this is the kind of thing that I see, and that's why I kind of see it in the same, that the closer everybody gets, I think, to the ability to use these types of tools, I think that just the more powerful and the more informed everybody gets, rather than, okay, I'm 10 spaces removed from the information, from the analysis. The more it's like, okay, I'm trying to trust somebody, I have to know, and so it's the value of flat organizations. It's the value of, close information.
I totally agree. I think that these mediums always evolve. Whenever there is a massive technological evolution, there is also a commensurate change in the way natural language is articulated, the mediums by which we adopt, right? The information age has introduced much shorter form correspondence. News articles are significantly shorter than they used to be. They've increased subtitles for digital media. This is a true story. They increased the length of subtitles because many people only read the title and subtitle and then go tell their friends about an article they just wrote. It's a very common problem. Obviously, Twitter has changed the formats that are acceptable. Even emojis constitute a new dialect that's evolved because of the nature of information. And I think that ChatGPT and all of these generative techniques are going to have a very large, I mean, emojis are not a gigantic shift, but I think actually the generative techniques for natural language are going to create a gigantic shift. I think that we're going to see people reject long form prose for in the immediate future. I think people are just not going to be interested in reading a page or a document that's 20 pages long, because the assumption is going to be that a paragraph of content was converted into 20 pages of content, and therefore, why am I wasting my time? I think eventually the response to that will be, well, we're just not learning enough with one paragraph of content. And so a validation, the validation that all the material that's put together for an article is authentically non-generative is going to be really powerful. I think that's going to come.
The trust society. Yeah, it's that I have to trust that what Charlie is sending me, you created in that 20-page document, that it says that you didn't just say, here's a paragraph, please go do it. Yeah. And it's funny because, I mean, you and I live in these worlds. I know if I see the word delve in the first 2 paragraphs, I'm like, I'm done. I know that you didn't spend any time in this. You probably threw it into ChatGPT. And again, I use ChatGPT all the time for writing, but it's a tool that I use as part of my tool set. It's not a, please go do this for me.
Totally. And here's a free idea to any intrepid entrepreneur who's listening. I think that if a team could build a document editor which has live bioinformatics, so it's tracking your eyeballs, it's tracking your cadence of writing, and then can create an authenticated token at the end of your document to say, yes, this was authentically written by this person over the course of the last 6 months. I actually think it's a really good business idea to be able to have a certificate of trust that goes along with the document once it's been generated, that, oh yeah, sure enough, Jason did sit down, spent 40 hours, over the course of 3 months writing this document. You can be, it's 100% verified. This is his own. This is his own work.
No, I love it. It's kind of like the artisanal. I hate to call it artisanal, but it's the artisanal certification kind of in this way, right?
Yeah,
I think you and I are the first person to say this, but in the age of AI, human generated things become actually more valuable.
I think so. And not to go off topic too far, because this is one of my favorite analogs is, I really don't believe in people being futurists. I think that's actually like a level below consultants in terms of my respect for professionalism. But I'll dip my toes in anyway. I'll delve into it anyway. I think that the future looks, if you look at the 2 most iconic science fiction universes, Star Wars and Star Trek. In Star Wars, you want to go faster, you just go faster, right? And all the robots are kind of anthropomorphized. They kind of have all these own identities, right? And everybody just kind of does what they do today, but just more sciencey. We still have warriors. We still have mechanics. It's just now, but with more stylized, ostensibly. Star Trek is very different, especially if you watch like The Next Generation, right? In Star Trek: The Next Generation, their computers not anthropomorphized at all. It's like Siri on steroids, right? And their one robot actually really struggles with the fact it's really ineffective at anthropomorphizing, right? Data is not effective at anthropomorphizing, and that's his biggest struggle. And I think actually that's much more akin to the future that we're looking towards, right? I think that artificial intelligence is ultimately going to delete all the tedious activities we have. If you want your tea to be hot and Earl Grey, you're going to be able to just tell a box that's going to generate it, right? You're not going to go and steep your own tea and make your own tea, right? If you want to figure out where your friend is on a ship, you're just going to ask the computer and it's going to tell you. You don't have to go find them. And so what's happened is AI in this paradigm has been able to create an environment where there are no tedious tasks. Everything is actually just very straightforward. And what do they focus on in every episode? A couple of people philosophizing about the natures of intelligence in their pajamas. It's basically every single Star Trek episode. It's just thinking about the more interesting nuances of being a human being, right? And so all the value in this future society, because all the tedium has been alleviated, all the materialism has been alleviated, all they focus on is what makes human a human, right? And I think that's a really elegant, exemplification of where we're heading. It's that all these ChatGPT is just removing all this tedium.
It's interesting, right? So I want to pull on this a little bit, and it's driven me a bit crazy in the last couple of weeks. In that, so it's funny you bring up data, right? And so for a long time, the AI symbol was the Terminator.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden now, it's her is the one we're using. And part of my question is, why did we suddenly skip over Jarvis? Like, that's the positive one. Like, let's do that. Data is obviously a very interesting one to kind of bring, because that's, to your point, much more existential, because Data's about figuring out his humanity and what does that mean. But, I prefer her to Terminator. Like, at least it's a positive direction. It's much more melancholy. It's a wonderful movie. But, and like, why weren't we thinking about, like, and it's better than how. I was reading this. I think it was Jim Pethokoukis on Twitter that said this a while back, which is interesting. It'll be very interesting to see if it's true, that he thought post the Hollywood strike, because AI became such a part of it, that we're actually going to see even more negative AI depictions in Hollywood. I'm like, that makes a lot of sense, and that depresses me because I want to see more. I think we can see more positive iterations. I'm not against seeing, like, hard, back to our Martian thing. Like, that was, I want to see challenge in films. I want to see that kind of, struggle, but it doesn't always have to be the doomerism.
Yeah, I think that I certainly believe that the vilification of artificial intelligence is going to increase. I think I don't agree with him on everything or much. I think Jon Stewart does a very good job of summarizing the zeitgeist for different industries. And his piece on the evolution of generative AI that came out a couple months ago, I think was very good. And I think it's emblematic of where the perceptions of generative AI are going. There are all of these leaders in the space. Sam Altman, certainly one. Elon's new group is certainly coming into vogue as well. They're under a lot of scrutiny, and I think that there are many bodies that are looking for failure for these folks because of the fear that they have. It's almost Luddite-esque fear about where artificial intelligence is going, and that fear mongering is kind of perpetuated because of the server wars that are going on in the backside for all these AI services. A lot of the people who are saying, hey, AI is going to come and cripple us, we need to put a pause on this, a lot of those people were really trying to get an advantage on the infrastructure needs of their own AI tools. They were looking for a way to stop out their competition. It's actually kind of I hope they make a documentary about it. It's fascinating.
Yeah, the regulatory capture element that is clearly going on is, amazing to behold.
Absolutely. And I would argue it's one of the most contrived and corrupt industrial nuances of American entrepreneurship in the last little bit. I mean, it is fascinating the way in which certain leaders are comfortable gaslighting the public about the capabilities of AI and in effect trying to gain an advantage against their competition. I don't see it. I do not think that we are one step closer to a generalized artificial intelligence than we were 15 years ago, 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago. All of the models right now that are getting so much attention are really, really beautiful statistical models that are taking really interesting approaches to very complex problems. But at the core, the delta between her and to some degree the Terminator, but let's just say an unanthropomorphized entity, that delta is all Hollywood. All of that's Hollywood. There's really not, even the new ChatGPT 4 exemplification that we're seeing with this humor, It's extremely good at mimicry. It is not extremely good at authentic originating thought. And that's because fundamentally we still aren't that much closer to understanding the mechanics of intelligence. It is a complicated biomechanical process. Neurons we have 80 billion plus of these that are operating in our brain. We don't really have that high fidelity on how they operate. We know that learning is about twisting proteins. We know that the synaptic electromagnetic web between these neurons is critical to how we think, we process, but we don't have any fidelity on that. In fact, a good analogy is if a neuron was a corn stalk, we need to be walking around the corn to be able to understand how they operate. But our best case scenario is we're flying at about 30,000 feet right now, which means you can see big fields of corn, right? You can understand how potentially they interact with each other. But until we're down at the ground level, we're going to have a really hard time truly understanding the nature of intelligence.
Right. We still can't fundamentally define a thought and how X thought is different than Y thought beyond it's an electrical signal and, an emotion's over here and, breathing's over there. We've got a ways to go to understanding what these things are.
Totally.
I love having it up at the philosophical level and the technical level. I do want to bring this conversation a bit to Austin and the ecosystem here and some of the things that we are doing. And I know that, you guys raised around from Trust, who's here, who's a great firm. One of the things that was kind of, I think, amazing that I saw recently on Twitter X that I just laughed at. There was a post about, hey, you can move your defense company to Florida because you don't only have to be in Austin or the Gundo. And I laughed at that, going like, okay, so the zeitgeist has moved. People are trying to compete against us now when it comes as a defense hub. How, as being now a defense company in Austin, how do you think about the ecosystem here?
So building a lab with pretty defensively the best team in artificial intelligence in Texas, we have had to really, really think about the culture of scientists, especially the way in which scientists choose and elect to operate with their time and professionally. And what I mean by that is that scientists are very complicated people. We're complicated critters. We are motivated by altruisms. We're motivated for the pursuit of capital T truth. We're motivated to be able to indulge in esoteric concepts while also tying that to valuable applied capabilities, right? That's how we find purpose and meaning. I've built a lot of science teams in my past. I'm a physicist by training, so I've been on science teams all over the country. We got it right at Valkyrie for the first time in my career of really building out a formidable science team. And the way we think about, and one of the things that we discovered is that if you can outline effective reasons why the altruisms that scientists hold most dearly are being advanced by the work that you're putting on their plate, on their scope, then you can actually find this really, really durable bond with them that you can go pursue big challenges like tackling gnarly, gritty defense-related challenges. And so, to some degree, the culture of Austin is supportive of that kind of, the expansive culture of Austin. It supports that as well. What I mean by that is that we have a lot of folks who are sympathetic and also appreciate the plight of soldiers who really look up to the military. Culturally, that's a Texan thing, even in Austin, which I would separate Austin culture from Texan culture. They are different, but they actually have a really nice. They play in the symphony nicely together. Mm-hmm. So part of it is that the ecosystem itself is more supportive to defense-related tasks. But I also think that where we've found success is by showing that if you want to protect the altruisms that you hold most dear, a great way to do that is to advance certain technologies and to also bring the people who are deploying those technologies into the lab. I mean, my scientists have met folks who I've been downrange with. They've met individuals who use these capabilities. They understand their mission space really well. And that framing, making it personal for them, has been really effective for us to be able to build these capabilities that are transformative. And I don't think you can do that in San Francisco. In fact, I know so. I've been part of 2 major defense initiatives where companies in San Francisco lost them because they couldn't get cultural buy-in. And we took on those projects, no problem. And not only did we take on those projects, but we actually protected innocent people by developing these technologies further, which I personally, I don't really understand how culturally you can say, hey, we don't want to go work on defense projects, but we're also going to be one of the predominant search engines for for the Chinese regime. I don't really understand how that cognitive dissonance plays, but that's not my problem. But instead, if I bring that project here to my team in Austin, I say, okay, I get this. Defense is a complicated beast. There are a lot of ethical challenges, but I'm going to bring you in a war fight. I'm going to let them explain what their deployment looks like. I'm going to let them talk to you about what they need and what happens when they're successful. Because when they're successful, we're not helping them kill innocent people. We're not helping them, destabilize democracies. We're helping to liberate people. We're helping to identify ways in which people can own their own destiny. People can own their own labor. They can realize the values that are so critical to us. American values for independence, for respecting individuals, for liberating themselves, for creating environments of equality. These are the core principles against which all these scientists actually strive to advance. And we created the vehicle to be able to do that here at the lab.
So I 100% agree on all that. And it's funny, I saw another thing I saw recently, someone was complaining to your point about like when you have, to your point, when you get better technology, it actually saves lives. Someone was complaining about, I don't remember the company, but it was like they were creating a more accurate gun. And somebody's complaining about, that's terrible. I was like, so you want them to miss? Like,
Yeah.
that causes more collateral damage. Like, yeah, sometimes I don't quite understand some of this stuff. From your perspective, I mean, I see it obviously the defense sector, and I'm not, I'm not in the defense sector. My wife is. Do you see it seems to be speeding up here in Austin, and especially the defense and tech intersection. When you look at something like Army Futures Command, moving here, do you see that as more of a catalyst event, or is it more of a validation event, or neither?
Yeah, I think they were looking for the ingredients for success, and I think that Austin had all the right ingredients. So now, would it have happened as much without Army Futures Command? I actually make the contention, yes. The intelligence community has a lot of presence in the Central Texas region. I'm not going to go into any more detail around that,
Sure.
But that's a very active community, and I actually think that even short of Army Futures Command, this would have happened. Was it an accelerant or a catalyst? Absolutely. And I think General Rainey's done a really, really good job of creating new initiatives and capturing a lot of that momentum. But I think that when they were scrutinizing these different areas to go to, I can't remember all the cities that they were considering. I think Pittsburgh was one, Boston was one, if I'm remembering right. I could be totally wrong. But I think when part of their calculus factored in the culture of Austin, which is we do push innovation, we do like keeping it weird, and at the same time we also super appreciate the immense amount of gravity that's facing the defense and the national security apparatus. Like, we do culturally appreciate that. We aren't protesting troops in Austin. We aren't, we have our own challenges with different policies that are created. Absolutely, we're a very active protesting city. But in terms of whether or not we're not the city that's spitting on troops. That hasn't really been in vogue since Vietnam. But if you were to pick a city that was going to have a visceral reaction to having more of a presence from the military, Austin's got to be pretty low on your list.
Right. So, as a defense tech hub, are the needs different in terms of like infrastructure, talent? Is there gaps that we have, or is it pretty much roughly the same needs as a traditional tech sector?
I think in a lot of ways, defense tech is more of a horizontal than it is a vertical, which I think overall will be very good for the city long term. What I mean by that is, if we really tripled down as a city on biotech, I think we'd actually be pretty limited in the types of roles that we would be bringing on, the types of innovations that we'd be pressing. We'd have a large biomedical contingent. We'd have a lot of chemists, electrical engineers, biophysicists, lots of folks like that. who be prerequisite for us to being able to advance and be really a world leader in that domain. Defense tech and national security technology, national security capabilities, overall, are actually have lots of different touch points in different sectors. Andromeda is a great example, right? We've built a tool to support our information warfighters. It's also really applicable to legal tech and insurance tech and banking tech and energy tech. And so we have the flexibility with this core bit of IP to be able to go and dominate in different sectors very, very flexibly. The truth is, it's also very true for different folks who are working for like the VA, supporting national security from the VA perspective. You have the ability now to go support healthcare more broadly. And so I think if we had to double down on a particular subcomponent, some subsector for technology, this is a really great one for the city long term. It's a really great long-term investment strategy because of all the derivative industries that we touch when we have a focus on national security. Now, that said, what's that going to do with the investment structure? Well, there's a lot of individuals who are looking for hockey stick returns, and that's not traditionally a defense tech profile. We have to have an evolving investor class to be able to support the infrastructure that we're developing here and to be looking at different profiles for returns. I'm not saying less returns. I'm not saying higher returns. I'm saying just a different profile of returns. Excuse me.
But do you think though with SpaceX, Palantir, Andrew, like that they have partially paved the way for those more traditional tech returns in defense?
Absolutely. I think that the asset class of venture, particularly around around SaaS, is evolving. We had a collapse of financial technology investments as a nation, over the last 5 years, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that SaaS companies overall have been hyperinflated, and they've largely been pumped and dumped. I don't think you have that luxury with defense tech because of the level of investment that you required of that. And so Palantir, which looked like for a long time a really great platform with really bespoke services that sat on top of that, 15 years ago, no venture capitalist is interested in that at all, right? There's a heavy services component to Palantir. Now, that's wildly more attractive than some kid coming off the street saying he's invented the next Uber. So I think that we're going to see a real evolution in the way venture is thinking about these types of investments. They're going to embrace it a little bit more, and they're going to have to get their LPs on board with, instead of a 7-year hockey stick target, a 10-year, much more stable, gradual growth paradigm. And that might change the way in which their LPs are remunerated. They may not look for big exits. They may be looking for cash flows, and that's going to really evolve that dynamic. And I'm excited to see some of the folks in the space who are thinking about that. Really talented investors in that space. I think of Patrick McKenna, who's also one of the Andromeda investors. I think of about Jordan, who's pushing some really incredible new investments as well. So there are a lot of people who are in the defense tech, the national security tech space, who are making investments, who are showing and demonstrating that they think about these problems the right way. But that needs to be a contagion, an evolution in the way all investors are thinking about this, so that profile for longevity is more acceptable, more palpable.
Well, Charlie, this has been a lot of fun, and when we go from Star Trek to Star Wars to Jarvis to everything else, always end with the same question: what's next, Austin?
Oh, wow. I think that the next thing for Austin, I think that we're going to see a big push to support the intelligence community the way we've seen a big push to support the defense community. I think that an equivalent to AFC is coming on the intelligence side, and I'm speaking selfishly. I'm looking forward to contributing to that.
Fantastic. Charlie, thanks for joining the Austin Next podcast.
Jason, I appreciate you so much. Thanks for your time today.
So what's next, Austin? We're glad you've joined us on this journey. Please subscribe at your favorite podcast catcher, leave us a review, and let your colleagues know about us. This will help us grow the podcast and continue bringing you unique interviews and insights. Thanks again for listening, and see you soon.